My name is Kristen Hohn. I currently work as the Historic Preservation Specialist for the Monmouth County Park System, and I also am the Program Chair for the ASNJ. So a few months ago, while at work, I was having a conversation with a park ranger, and he mentioned that he had heard that there had been this metal detecting survey that was done in the 90s, and that if I was ever able to, find those musket balls that happened at this survey within one of our parks, could I give him a call so that we could look through them together? And the conversation sparked my curiosity. So I went poking around our artifact storage and was able to find the box in question. A review of the brief report that was produced by the Metal Detecting Club of the musket balls from the survey revealed a really interesting bit of research that I want to share with you all tonight. So while I didn't perform the survey myself or the analysis, I do intend to catalog the collection and to register the site with the state. It's currently not. And that's a pretty crucial step that, could have been completed at the time of excavation, but that will make sure that it is now so that we can protect the resource. So from here, we're going to hop back to 1778, and we're going to pick up the story on the evening of June 28th. So like Mike said, fighting concluded for the day around 7 p.m. once the daylight is starting to recede. The big takeaway from the Battle of Monmouth is that the Americans end up performing surprisingly well, better than they had done in previous engagements. And they're holding their own in open combat against these battle-hardened British regulars. But during the battle, General Knyphausen already ordered the early departure of the British baggage train towards Middletown. At sunset, when the engagement calmed for the evening, Washington fully intended to resume fighting the following day. However, unbeknownst to the Continentals, British General Clinton ordered a covert retreat beginning around 11 p.m. And though both sides were only camped about a mile apart, Clinton kept the campfires burning to hide their intentions as the army slipped away. When dawn rose, it became pretty apparent that the army had decamped in the middle of the night under the cover of darkness. So while we don't know the exact route, to my knowledge, I don't think that was ever mapped. We do know several of the major roads and paths that the British took on their retreat march. We know that they passed through Nut Swamp on their way towards Middletown, and that they camped a mile or two outside of the town of Middletown after the battle on June 29th. Then they proceeded towards Sandy Hook and arrived on the 30th, and they waited transport to New York, fully mobilizing the entire detachment by July 7th. So this map from 1781 was produced by John Hills for General Clinton during the war. And in the bottom left corner, we can see Monmouth Courthouse and Freehold all the way in that bottom corner. And that's the location of the battle. And so then they move east along what today is roughly Route 537. Then when they hit Swimming River, they move north following Middletown Lincroft Road to Middletown. And then once they hit the village of Middletown, they go east along Kings Highway through the rest of the part of Middletown Township to reach Sandy Hook. So the local lore in the area, I mean, it's really well documented in Middletown that that the British moved along through the township. Hold on one second here. In the bicentennial in 1976, the township of Middletown erected a portion of the retreat route. They erected signage along Kings Highway. So here we see signs for the actual retreat route. And they also posted some British campsite signs, again, along Kings Highway, that northern portion of the retreat route. But currently there's no signs marking the southern section of the route. The area that we're going to take a closer look at now is this area circled here between Nut Swamp Brook and Crooked Brook. During the late 18th century, there's a farmstead located at this site owned by Sylvanus Grover, and he had that tenanted out to an unknown farmer. The 18th century house is still there, although like most historic houses in this area that have survived, it's been subject to extensive additions over the years. So it's a little unrecognizable as purely an 18th century house. But today the house is used as the Sunnyside Recreation Area's facility activity center, and it also houses the headquarters of the Monmouth County Conservation Foundation. It also, within the park system, Sunnyside is the equestrian center. So on the portion that we're looking west of Middletown Lincroft Road, you can see in the park system map, there is currently a paved trail there, and then there's a path extension, unpaved path extension. According to the paper by Dan Civilich in the 1996 edition of the Journal of Historic Archaeology, the Deep Search Metal Detecting Club obtained a permit from the park system in 1992 to search for old coins along this really well-known historic road. And a member, they were originally on the east side of the road along where all the park buildings are, but a member of the group crosses over the road and heads up to this small little knoll, and he finds a musket ball. So immediately all the other members of the group go on the other side of the road, the west side of the road, and begin searching, and they end up finding 45 musket balls on the western portion of that road. 25 of those were pulled for study. And that preliminary survey, unfortunately, was not formally mapped, but it did highlight the need for a more in-depth study. So in May of 1993, an additional excavation was undertaken, and it's this survey that we're really going to focus on. They used 4 control points to plot their finds, which are visible on this map. The farm field was plowed, and the volunteers with metal detectors walked along the furrows, flagging also any visible non-metallic historic or prehistoric finds that were on the surface. One of the patterns that's noted by Civilich when the artifact locations were plotted is that they're almost sort of linear. If you look on this map, they follow the road in this linear pattern. And we'll touch more on that later. So 27 additional musket balls are found during the 93 survey. And 1 ball was impacted, which you can see here. 3 of them showed evidence of teeth marks, and 25 fell within the range of 68 to 70 caliber bullets or musket balls in diameter. So, you know, again, at first glance, if you hadn't heard Mike's presentation before, you might have asked, well, what's the significance of musket ball diameter? And we're going to revisit this slide from his presentation here. So it becomes very important when you're trying to figure out who's stationed where. So overall, 96% of the musket balls found in this location match the Brown Bess rifle, the Brown Bess musket, which we know is being used by British regulars. Like Mike said, the American forces are using a variety of American rifles, also the French pattern rifle. They are also using the Brown Bess and some smaller caliber pistols. But what we're looking at in this location is, 96% all fall within this single range. And another important part is that 25 of the 27 musket balls, only 1 of the 27 musket balls from the 93 survey was impacted. The rest didn't show any signs of having even been fired, meaning that they were very likely just dropped. So a large amount of dropped musket balls in one general location is something that points to might indicate a military campsite. From historic records, we know that the regulars camped a mile or 2 outside of Middletown Village on the night after the battle. And we also know that this location along Nut Swamp Brook was the site of a historic farmstead, which was on the retreat route and may have been this really attractive stopping point as they're on their way towards Middletown Village. As I mentioned, 3 of the 27 balls that were found showed evidence of having been chewed. So here we can see what almost clearly looks like a molar mark in that first ball. I'm sure everybody's heard the phrase bite the bullet, but what reason would the soldiers have to actually chew on musket balls? And it turns out there's several reasons. First is the classic concept of biting down on a bullet when in pain. So lead is a soft metal, provides a certain amount of give. And given that the Army is now retreating from a large battle on the day prior, it's likely that many soldiers spent the evening doctoring wounds inflicted during the fight. Another reason that somebody might chew on a musket ball, believe it or not, is the heat. So by sucking or chewing on a cool musket ball, soldiers could continue to keep their salivatory glands activated. And this is particularly interesting given the fact that the Battle of Monmouth took place during this notoriously hot week in June. Temperatures were said to be in the upper 90s, and the heat index was supposed to be very, very high. So to put that in a little bit of context, during the entire battle, there were 700 fatalities between both sides reported, but there was another 100 fatalities just due to heat stroke. A few other historic finds in that same location included buttons, a fragment of a buckle. Here we see a utensil handle that's stamped with the name Walsh. I'm not sure if you can see that from this image here. We also have the lip of a hand-blown bottle, another button here, and a bale seal. So bale seals are used to mark large quantities of goods, particularly think like cloth and textiles, just to prove that they'd been through inspection and that they were appropriately taxed. Is basically like an okay stamp that they had gone through the taxation process. Most of the historic finds were in the plow zone, and a lot of these dated to the 18th century, the same context. So at first glance, this site might just seem like another, like a bunch of musket balls to the untrained eye. But by looking at the site and as a whole picture, we get a little bit clearer. One of the main things that we look at are that the balls are in a context, the plow zone context with other 18th century items. There's a high percentage of dropped, unfired, non-impacted balls, which indicates a non-combative military site. Mike was talking about a lot of these skirmish areas, but the fact that all of these balls, for the most part, were unfired, indicates that there was a military company there, but they just got dropped during average movement. And the presence or the absence, of additional features like really established hearth features indicates that the site was used very, very short for a short period of time, ephemeral use. So either it was an overnight campsite or maybe just a large stopping point for the army on their retreat. The overwhelming majority of balls that were used that we found at the site, like I said, 96% of those musket balls were the same size used by British regulars in the Brown Bess musket. And that all matches and correlates exactly to all the other documented contemporary sites in the area. So when we're looking at these British skirmish sites, we're finding balls of the same caliber. The conclusions reached by Dan Sivelich during his review of these 52 musket balls from the 92 and 93 survey indicates that this site was very likely a short-term military campsite or stopping point. And remember that linear nature of the way that the musket balls were shown on that map tends to hint at military formation camped alongside the road. Last but not least, the site's located along a documented retreat route, and it fits within the other known parameters of that June 29th campsite. So though arguments remain conjectural, the evidence seems to really indicate that Sunnyside site is a very good candidate for one of these known historic campsites. You saw Mike's images and some of those maps, and the British Army was had a very large breadth along that eastern boundary. So it's likely that they split and took several routes, but we know that the north route along Middletown Lincroft Road was a well-traveled road during that retreat route, and that's exactly where this site is. I did try to reach Dan Sivelich this week to discuss his findings and to discuss that survey prior to this presentation, but unfortunately I wasn't able to make contact with him. But if you are interested in his work, I really suggest that you take a minute to look at the following resources. He has a musket ball and short shot identification guide, which is really helpful if you want just an overall view of the way that you can kind of read musket balls. And the one paper that talks specifically about this site is that Analyzing Musket Balls to Interpret a Revolutionary War Site that's in Historic Archaeology, and it can be found on JSTOR. And then, of course, no study of the Battle of Monmouth would be complete without referencing Fatal Sunday, the book by Gary Wheeler Stone, who is the historian for the Monmouth Battlefield, or I think he's retired now, but for Monmouth Battlefield Historic Site, and Mark Lunder. And I look forward to any other questions that you have. Thanks so much for your attention.